If you enjoy justice tales, revenge stories with meaning, and emotionally powerful narratives where intelligence defeats cruelty, this channel is for you. Subscribe to Justice Tales Unveiled for unforgettable stories where silence speaks, truth emerges, and justice always finds its way. The dogs stopped first, not because the trail was gone, not because they were tired. They stopped because the swamp told them to. The men did not understand it at first. Dogs did that sometimes. They hesitated, sniffed the air, pulled back on the leash as if something unseen stood in their way. One of the men cursed softly and tugged harder. The leash went tight. The dog let out a low, confused whine and refused to move. "Forward," the man said. The dog sat down. That was when the swamp went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not rest. This was the kind of silence that felt deliberate, like a held breath. The insects cut off mid-song. The frogs disappeared into mud and reeds. Even the water stopped whispering against the roots. Lantern light trembled. The woman stood ahead of them, knee-deep in black water, her back turned. She had stopped running. Mud coated her dress, heavy and dark, clinging to her legs as if the swamp itself had dressed her. Her hair was pulled tight, slicked down by sweat and water. A child was bound to her chest with a torn strip of cloth, small and still, their face hidden beneath her chin. She stood perfectly still. One of the men raised his gun. "Shoot," another whispered. No one did. They had chased her since dusk, through low trees that tore at their coats, through water that swallowed their boots and refused to give them back, through darkness thick enough to press against the eyes. They had followed her cries at first, then her silence. They had laughed when the dogs picked up her scent, laughed when she slipped, laughed when she fell. A woman with a child could not outrun men like them. That was certainty. That was how the world worked. Yet here they were. The woman slowly turned her head, not fully, just enough for them to see one eye, dark and steady, catching lantern light without reflecting it. She knew they were there. The dogs whined again. One backed away, claws scraping uselessly at mud that no longer felt solid. Another lunged forward and yelped sharply, as if burned. The handler stumbled, nearly losing his balance. "What's wrong with them?" someone muttered. No one answered. The woman lowered her head slightly, her cheek brushing the cloth wrapped around the child. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Not a prayer, not a threat, an acknowledgement. She lifted her hand and pressed her palm flat against the water. The swamp responded, not violently, not suddenly. The ground softened just enough. The water thickened, pulling instead of holding. Roots shifted beneath the surface, unseen but purposeful, like fingers adjusting their grip. One man stepped forward and sank to his ankle. He cursed, loud and sharp. Another took a step back and slipped. Panic rippled, thin and fast. "Careful!" someone shouted. "Careful!" The woman turned fully now. Her face was calm, not angry, not afraid, tired, deeply tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from long endurance, not momentary fear. Her eyes moved across them slowly, counting. "You should have let me go," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady, almost gentle. The words did not carry anger. They carried finality. A man fired his gun. The sound cracked through the night and died quickly, swallowed by trees and water. The bullet struck nothing. The woman did not flinch. The swamp shifted again. Mud loosened beneath boots. Water crept higher, colder. One man lost his balance completely and went down hard, his lantern dropping into the water with a hiss. Darkness rushed in, shouts followed, orders, curses. The dogs broke free, and the swamp decided. 2 nights earlier, the injustice had arrived without warning. It always did. No shouting, no chains clattering, no raised voices. Just a knock on the cabin door as the sun fell behind the trees, and 2 men standing where they did not belong. One held a paper. The other held rope. The woman opened the door with her child balanced on her hip. Her name was Zora. She did not ask why they were there. She already knew. Men who came with rope never brought good news. Men who carried paper believed it excused everything. "You're being moved," the man with the paper said. "South," the other added. Zora said nothing. South meant fields that swallowed people. South meant children taken before they learned their own names. South meant never seeing this land again. She looked down at her child, small, warm, breathing softly against her skin. "When?" she asked. "Now." They did not let her pack. They did not let her gather food. They turned their backs while she wrapped the child tighter against her chest, not out of kindness, but impatience. When they stepped outside, Zora stepped back inside and closed the door. She waited. Not long. Just long enough. Then she lifted the child, opened the back window, and disappeared into the trees. Zora did not run blindly. Fear moved her legs, but knowledge guided them. She knew which paths erased footprints and which remembered them forever. She knew where the water lay shallow and where it swallowed whole. She knew how to move without breaking branches, how to step where mud would close behind her like a secret. She had learned these things long before this night her mother had taught her. "Don't fight the land," her mother used to say. "Listen to it." Zora listened. The dogs came fast, too fast. She smelled them before she heard them. Wet fur, raw meat. Men followed behind, confident and loud. She angled toward water. Cold reached her knees, then her thighs. She lifted the child higher and kept moving. The cloth binding them together grew heavy, soaked through, but she did not stop. Stopping was how people vanished. She slowed only once, pressing her back to a cypress tree whose roots rose from the water like clenched fists. She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. Not tonight, she thought. Then she moved again. The men spread out. They always did, confident in numbers, certain the land would betray her. They did not know what she carried. She had no charms tied to her waist, no bottles, no powders wrapped in cloth. What she carried was older, knowledge pressed into bone by women who had survived long enough to teach it. By dawn, her legs burned. By midday, her breath came shallow. By nightfall, she understood something she had not allowed herself to think before. They would not stop. This was not about returning her. This was about ownership. That night she pressed her palm into the mud and made a choice. Not revenge, balance. Now, standing in the swamp with the men seeking around her, Zora felt no triumph, only completion. One man screamed as the ground gave way beneath him. Another reached out and was dragged down by his own panic. The water rose slowly, deliberately, cold and patient. Zora turned away. She stepped forward, moving where the swamp held her firm, and rejected them. Behind her, the shouting grew desperate. Orders dissolved into pleas. Boots thrashed uselessly. She did not look back. She did not need to. Because some injustices do not need to be punished loudly. They only need to be allowed to end. And as the last lantern light vanished beneath the surface, Zora walked deeper into the swamp, carrying her child and the weight of what she had begun. The men were still alive, but the hunt was over, and somewhere in the darkness, something old and patient watched her go. The swamp did not release Zora all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, as if testing her intention, as if deciding whether she was something passing through or something meant to remain. By the time the sky began to thin from black to gray, the air had grown heavy and damp, pressing down on her chest with every breath. Each step felt deliberate now, chosen rather than driven by panic. Zora moved carefully, her muscles aching, her legs stiff from cold and strain. The child slept against her chest, small breaths warm and steady, unaware of how close the world had come to closing around them. Zora tilted her head down every few steps, not to look, but to feel. Breath meant life, rhythm meant time. Behind her, the swamp settled. It did not rage, it did not roar. It simply returned to itself as if nothing unusual had happened. Water smoothed over disturbances, mud closed, roots stilled. The night swallowed the last sounds of men who had believed themselves untouchable. Zora did not think of them as she moved on. Thinking back was dangerous. She climbed gradually out of the deepest water into ground that rose unevenly, trading sucking mud for slick roots and fallen leaves. Pain flared in her calves and hips, sharp and insistent. She welcomed it. Pain meant she was still inside her body. Fear had a way of pulling people out of themselves, scattering thought until nothing remained but instinct. She needed her mind intact now. The forest beyond the swamp was different. Taller pines, drier ground. Fewer places to hide. Sound carried farther here. A snapped twig echoed. A breath felt loud. Zora slowed, counting steps, listening to the way the land answered her movement. She did not believe the hunt was finished. Men like those did not stop because something went wrong. They stopped only when something became unbearable, humiliating, or impossible to explain. What had happened in the swamp would follow them. It would sour their confidence, but it would not end their interest. Not yet. By mid-morning, hunger began to gnaw at her, sharp and distracting. She had eaten little before running, less afterward. Escape burned energy the way fire burned dry wood. Zora scanned the ground as she moved, eyes trained to pick out small mercies the land sometimes offered. A cluster of wild berries near a fallen pine caught her attention. She hesitated, listening. Silence held. She knelt and ate quickly, leaving most untouched. Taking everything was a mistake. The land remembered greed. The child stirred, fussing softly. Zora dipped her fingers into the berry juice and brushed them against the child's lips. It was not enough, but it bought time. Time was the only thing she could afford to spend. She rose and continued on, angling away from paths men favored. Roads were traps dressed as hope. Towns were worse. She aimed instead for forgotten spaces, abandoned clearings, old trails no longer worth maintaining, places that existed between attention. By noon, the heat pressed down hard, burning away the damp chill of the swamp and replacing it with thick, suffocating air. Sweat soaked her clothes, washing away the careful layers of mud and rot she had used to mask her scent. She cursed under her breath and veered toward a shallow creek, stepping into the water and wading upstream, letting it erase her again. It was there she saw the sign, a broken branch, fresh, not animal, and on the far bank, pressed into soft earth, a boot print. Her pulse spiked, then settled into something cold and precise. They were ahead of her. The realization did not bring panic. Panic wasted energy. Panic made mistakes. Instead, it brought clarity sharp enough to hurt. They had changed tactics. Someone among them knew the land better than she had hoped. Someone had learned from the swamp, not the way Zora had, but enough to adapt. Zora backed away slowly from the creek, every muscle tense, her breath shallow and controlled. She crouched behind a stand of young pines and pressed her palm into the earth, grounding herself. Running blindly would kill her. Standing still too long would do the same. She closed her eyes and reached inward, not to memory yet, but to warning. Her mother's voice rose unbidden, as it often did in moments like this. Not loud, never commanding, calm. "You don't use what you don't understand," her mother had said, "and you don't open doors you can't close." Zora had avoided calling directly on what she knew so far. She had relied on land knowledge, patience, misdirection, but instinct told her the hunt had shifted. The men were no longer simply following, they were anticipating. The child whimpered softly, sensing the tension. Zora swallowed and lowered her head until her forehead brushed the cloth around the child. "All right," she murmured. "Just a little." She reached into the small pouch tied at her waist. It was nearly empty. She had fled without thinking, grabbing only what her hand closed around in the dark. Now she felt again what was inside, a scrap of red thread, a small dried snake vertebra, and a pinch of grave dirt wrapped in cloth. Her fingers stilled. Grave dirt was not a tool to be used lightly. It carried weight, memory, obligation. "You don't use the dirt of the dead unless you're ready to owe them something," her mother had warned. Zora hesitated. Then she heard it. A distant shout. A man calling to another, close enough that the sound carried shape. They were nearer than she had thought. Her hands stopped shaking. She pressed the dirt into the soil beneath her palm, mixing it with living ground. Not claiming it, borrowing it. She tied the red thread around the vertebra with practiced fingers, knotting it once, then twice. Her lips moved, shaping intention rather than words. "Confuse what hunts me, turn their certainty against them." The air shifted, not dramatically. No thunder, no sudden wind, just a subtle change, like the pressure before rain. Sounds dulled, distances warped. The forest leaned inward slightly, listening. Zora stood and moved again, but now she moved crooked. She broke patterns deliberately, stepped where no trail should exist, brushed bark and leaves to scatter her presence in every direction at once. She let herself be seen briefly, then vanished. Behind her, something went wrong. A man shouted in anger, another cursed, words blurred together, sharpened by fear. A gunshot cracked the air too close. Zora flinched but did not stop. She ran now, not blindly but urgently, pushing her body beyond comfort, beyond reason. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed. She focused only on forward motion, on the weight of her child, on the promise she had made the moment she chose flight. The ground rose sharply, pulling her into higher terrain. Rocks replaced roots, trees thinned, sunlight cut through the canopy in harsh shards. She stumbled once, barely catching herself before falling hard. The child cried out. The sound cut through everything. Zora froze, heart hammering so loudly she was certain it could be heard. She pressed her hand gently over the child's mouth, rocking, whispering nonsense sounds meant to soothe. The cries faded, but the damage was done. Behind her, the hunt surged. Boots pounded, voices sharpened. Dogs barked wildly now, no longer coordinated. "They're splitting up," someone shouted. "I can't see straight." "What's happening?" Zora forced herself upright and ran again, tears streaking down her face without her noticing. The woods ended abruptly at a rocky outcrop overlooking a shallow ravine. She skidded to a stop. There was nowhere obvious to go. The ravine was steep, cluttered with fallen stone and brush. Dangerous, possibly deadly. Behind her, the hunters closed in. Zora looked down at her child, then back at the ravine. Fear rose hot and fierce, but beneath it lay something harder. Choice. She stepped to the edge and jumped. The fall did not feel like falling. It felt like being taken. Air tore past her. Branches clawed at her dress. Stones scraped skin. Gravity pulled harder than fear could argue with. She twisted instinctively, turning her body so her back took the worst of it, arms locked tight around her child. Pain flared white and sharp, then dulled into distance as they struck the slope and slid the rest of the way down in a cascade of leaves and loose rock. They landed in mud, thick, cold, forgiving mud. Zora lay still, her mind racing ahead of her body. Every bone screamed, her shoulder throbbed with a deep, nauseating ache. But the weight against her chest was still warm, still breathing. She lifted her head slowly and looked down. The child's eyes were wide, stunned more than hurt. A thin cry escaped, then grew louder, indignant, alive. Zora laughed once, a broken sound that startled even her. She pressed her face into the child's hair. "We're still here," she whispered. "We're still here." Above them, the ravine rim erupted with shouts. "She went over." "She's dead." "Ain't no way." A dog barked sharply, then went silent. Zora pushed herself upright despite the pain and crawled toward the narrowest part of the ravine, where rock walls leaned inward and shadows thickened. She tucked herself into a natural hollow where water seeped constantly, masking scent and sound. She waited. Minutes passed, then more. Voices drifted down, less certain now. "Can't see her. Dog won't come down. This place ain't right." The ravine seemed to hold its breath with Zora. Finally, a decision. "We mark it," a voice said. "Come back later." Boots retreated, frustration heavy in their tone. Zora stayed still long after silence returned, long after her legs went numb and her shoulder throbbed so hard it made her dizzy. She counted breaths, counted heartbeats. Only when the angle of light changed did she move again. Climbing out the same way was impossible. Going deeper was the only option. She followed the trickle of water upstream, using rock and shadow to hide her progress. Each step sent pain flaring through her hip, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she was alive. The channel opened into a shallow recess beneath an overhang, dry enough to rest, hidden enough to breathe. Zora lowered herself slowly, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave she could no longer outrun. The child slept almost immediately. Zora watched the rise and fall of that small chest, anchoring herself to it. Her thoughts drifted, unbidden, to the women who had taught her. They had never promised safety, only possibility. As dusk crept back in, Zora stirred. She ate the last of the berries she had saved and drank sparingly from the stream. She cleaned the scrape on the child's leg with water and a crushed leaf she trusted. Above them, somewhere beyond stone and tree, men argued, blamed dogs, blamed land, blamed each other. Zora felt no triumph, only resolve. When night fell fully again, she rose. She did not go far, she went smart. She crossed an old trail once used by loggers, followed it just long enough to scatter her presence, then left it abruptly, doubling back and crossing water again. By dawn, she was gone from the ravine entirely. Behind her, the place would remember the jump, the uncertainty, the feeling that something had slipped beyond reach. Ahead of her lay deeper danger, harsher choices, and a growing awareness that survival was no longer her only task. She had become something the hunters would whisper about, and whispers, once born, were hard to kill. The world forgot Zora the way it always forgot inconvenient truths, quietly. No announcements marked her disappearance. No record kept her absence sharp. The men who had chased her spoke less and less of that night. At first, they argued about it loudly, over drink and fire, blaming the dogs, the land, each other. Later, their voices lowered, stories softened, edges blurred. Fear found easier shapes to hide behind. She drowned, one said eventually. The child never made it, another added. Swamp took her, a third concluded, as if the land were a thing that happened randomly, without memory or judgment. Zora let the lie live. She understood something most people never learned. Survival did not require being remembered. It required being overlooked. She moved north and east, not straight, never straight. Straight lines were for people who believed the world owed them direction. Zora trusted curves, detours, places where the land folded into itself and hid its seams. The first winter was the hardest. Cold stripped sound from the air and left nothing but bone-deep silence. Hunger came sharper, more demanding. Snow betrayed even careful steps. Zora learned to move only when wind erased tracks, learned to sleep in fragments, learned to wake without panic. The child learned too, not through instruction but observation, learned when to stay still, learned how silence could feel like safety, learned that the world could be dangerous and kind at the same time, often without warning. Zora did not teach the child fear. She taught discipline. They survived by borrowing from the land and paying it back carefully. Zora took only what was offered. She listened for signs. She watched how animals moved, how they disappeared without panic. She let the land shape her rather than fighting it. Years passed this way, not cleanly, not easily, but steadily. Zora became thinner, stronger. Her movements slowed, not from weakness, but from precision. She learned how to make absence convincing, how to leave traces that led nowhere, how to suggest a presence larger than herself. Hunters who entered certain woods returned unsettled. Some did not return at all, though no one ever found bodies. Camps were discovered empty. Trails ended in places that made no sense. Dogs refused to track. Horses balked and reared for no clear reason. Men talked. At first they laughed, then they whispered. They blamed spirits, curses, bad luck. None of them said her name. Zora did not correct them. She had learned that fear grew best when fed indirectly. The child grew. Strong legs, sharp eyes, a mind that watched before speaking. Zora allowed questions but answered only what mattered. She taught the child the names of plants, the way water moved underground, how to feel weather changes before clouds gathered. She did not teach hatred. She taught memory. "You remember what was done," she said once quietly as they rested beneath a stand of pines. "But you don't let it drive you. You let it guide you." The child nodded, not fully understanding, but storing the words carefully. Time passed. The world changed around them. New paths cut through old forest, new men took old roles, laws shifted, then hardened again. Cruelty learned to wear different faces, but it never truly left. Zora felt it one night before she heard it. A disturbance in the air, a subtle tension, like a string pulled too tight. She stilled, listened. Voices drifted through the trees, male, confident, familiar in shape if not in sound. They were not searching wildly. They moved with intent, purpose. Someone had pointed them. Zora crouched low and watched through branches heavy with shadow. A fire burned ahead, small and controlled. Men sat around it, boots stretched toward the heat. Their clothes were worn, but their posture spoke of ownership. They were not passing through. They were hunting. One of them spoke, his voice carrying easily in the quiet. "People still say she's out there," he said, half amused. "That woman, the one the swamp swallowed," another snorted. "Stories. Stories don't make dogs refuse trails," the first replied. Zora felt something tighten inside her. The voice. Older now, rougher, but unmistakable. It belonged to the man who had held the rope that night. Memory sharpened. She watched him move closer to the firelight, saw the way age had stooped his shoulders slightly, saw the scar along his jaw she remembered from long ago. His hair was thinner now, his confidence less loud. But his eyes still measured the world as if it owed him something. Zora did not move. She listened. "They think she died," the man continued. "But I know better. You don't lose something like that and have it stay lost." Another man leaned forward. "You saying she's still alive?" "I'm saying the land remembers," he replied. "And so do I." The fire cracked softly. Zora's breathing remained slow, steady. She did not feel rage. She felt alignment. The past had come looking for her, and it had brought itself close. Zora slipped away before dawn, moving so quietly the forest did not mark her passage. She did not lead them away. She did not confuse them yet. She watched. Days passed, then weeks. She learned their roots, their habits, the way they spoke when they believed themselves alone. She noted which ones doubted, which ones followed, which ones feared. She waited until certainty settled. Then she began to shape it. The first sign was small, a trail that led them in a wide arc and returned them to the same clearing hours later. They laughed it off at first, blaming fatigue. The second sign unsettled them. A dog refused to drink from a stream, whining and backing away. One man cursed and dragged it forward. The dog slipped its collar and vanished into the woods, never seen again. The third sign broke something. They found a camp they had marked earlier, stripped clean. Fire cold, footprints circling but leading nowhere. Arguments followed, voices sharpened, blame spread. Zora stayed just ahead of their frustration, letting it ferment. She wanted them tired, uncertain, aware that something was watching. One night she let them see her. Not clearly, just a shape. A figure moving between trees where no one should move so smoothly. A suggestion of presence. One man fired blindly. The shot echoed uselessly. The shape vanished. Fear settled. "They say she uses the land," one whispered. "No," another corrected quietly. "They say the land uses her." Zora heard this and smiled once without humor. The men decided to move deeper. That was the mistake. They followed a path Zora had not walked in years, a place she had avoided until now. A stretch of ground where water ran just beneath the surface and roots tangled thick enough to trip even careful feet. She led them there deliberately. The dogs faltered first, then the men. Zora did not rush. She let exhaustion do its work, let hunger gnaw, let sleep deprivation dull judgment. When they finally reached the edge of the swamp again, night was falling. Lanterns were lit. Zora stood waiting. She did not plan violence. She planned conclusion. The men entered the water reluctantly this time. Memories tugged at them. Stories whispered. But pride pushed harder. This time, the man with the scar said, "We finish it." Zora pressed her palm into the mud. The swamp recognized her. But it hesitated. Something had changed. The land felt crowded, disturbed. New paths cut too deep. Old balances shifted. Zora felt it clearly now. The swamp was tired, and tired things did not always obey. A misstep, a hesitation. Zora felt it before she saw it. The ground did not respond as it once had. Roots shifted, but slower. Mud pulled, but unevenly. One man went down, but another found footing. A dog lunged forward instead of retreating. Zora's breath caught. The land was no longer alone. Men had learned, adapted, and the certainty she had cultivated in them twisted suddenly into resolve. "She's here," the man with the scar said, his voice cutting clean through the night. "I know it." Lantern light swept the water. Zora stepped back. The child stirred against her chest. For the first time in years, Zora felt urgency sharpen into danger. The swamp would not finish this for her. Not tonight. Not this way. She turned and ran. Boots splashed behind her. Shouts followed. Dogs barked. The hunt was no longer uncertain. It was focused, and Zora understood with cold clarity that patience alone would not be enough anymore. Something would have to be paid. Night did not rush in this time. It arrived slowly, deliberately, as if the world itself wanted to watch what would happen next. Zora moved fast but not wildly, her feet finding ground by memory rather than sight. The child was heavier now, older, stronger, clinging instinctively as Zora ran. Branches tore at her sleeves, thorns scratched skin. Pain flared and faded. She did not slow. Behind her, the hunt had changed shape. This was no longer a search clouded by superstition or uncertainty. The men moved with direction now, shouting orders instead of questions. The dogs were controlled, leashed tighter, driven harder. Lantern light cut through the trees in wide, sweeping arcs, searching not for mystery but for confirmation. "She's running," someone shouted. "Cut her off." Zora angled sharply, abandoning the path she had prepared, and plunging into broken terrain where the ground dipped and rose without warning. She felt the land resist her now, not betray her, resist her, as if reminding her that nothing could be owned forever, not even familiarity. Her lungs burned, her injured shoulder protested with every step. She adjusted her grip on the child and pushed on. She had led others through this stretch before, refugees, the lost, the desperate. She knew where the land narrowed into choke points and where it opened too wide to hide. She knew where sound traveled and where it died, but the men behind her had learned too. They did not rush blindly. They spread out, flanked, anticipated. One group stayed high, moving along the ridges. Another stayed low, pushing through brush with grim patience. Zora heard hooves. The sound cut through the night with brutal clarity. Horses. Her stomach tightened. Dogs could be confused. Men on foot could be misled. Horses changed everything. They flattened ground. They closed distance. They broke patterns. Zora veered toward rockier ground where hooves would struggle, her legs screaming as she climbed. The forest thinned abruptly, giving way to scrub and exposed stone. Moonlight spilled down, cruel and bright. Open ground again. Danger. She slowed just long enough to breathe, scanning desperately for cover. Then she saw it. A narrow cut in the earth, half hidden by shadow and vines. An old animal path, steep and easy to miss. She plunged into it just as a gunshot cracked the air. Dirt exploded near her feet. The child cried out, sharp and frightened. Zora swallowed a scream and slid down into the cut, scraping skin and cloth, plunging into cooler darkness. Boots skidded above her. "She went down here!" Another shot echoed uselessly overhead. The path narrowed, forcing Zora sideways. Stone scraped bone. Pain flared white-hot, but she did not stop until the cut leveled into a shallow hollow, choked with roots and fallen branches. She collapsed behind them, chest heaving, ears ringing. Above, men argued. "Careful! Can't see her. She's bleeding." Zora pressed her palm into the earth again, desperation sharpening her focus. This was no longer about confusion. This was about seconds. She did not call on memory alone this time. She called on misalignment. She focused on the men's certainty, the way confidence narrowed perception. She let her breathing slow, her presence shrink. She shifted vines just enough to break outlines, smeared damp earth across her face and arms until skin became shadow. A man slid into the hollow, boots loud against stone. "She's down here," he muttered. Zora waited. He stepped past her hiding place. She moved, not with rage, not with hesitation. She struck loose a section of unstable earth and stone above him. It gave way with a sudden roar, sending him sprawling backward with a shout of pain and surprise. Chaos erupted. "What happened? Are you hit?" Zora slipped away in the confusion, crawling through the narrowest point of the hollow and emerging on the far side where the land dropped again into dense growth. She ran. This time she did not pace herself. She emptied what remained of her strength, pushing until her vision blurred and her body felt hollowed out. She did not stop until the sounds behind her fragmented into distance. When she finally slowed, dusk was folding back into night. She leaned against a tree and slid down, trembling uncontrollably. The child slept again, exhausted beyond protest. Zora closed her eyes and let herself feel it. Then, the fear, the pain, the weight of what she was doing. She was no longer just escaping. She was being hunted with intent, and the land was no longer simply shelter. It was becoming a witness. She moved again under full darkness, guided by instinct rather than plan. The forest changed as she traveled. Pines replaced broadleaf trees. Needles softened her footsteps, but betrayed scent more easily. Hunger clawed relentlessly now. The roots and berries she gathered kept her alive, but did nothing to make her strong. By the third night after the cut, she heard no dogs, no shouting, no gunfire. The silence frightened her more than pursuit. Men who hunted learned patience. They waited for mistakes. Zora did not allow herself to believe she had escaped. She followed a ridgeline until dawn, then hid beneath fallen logs, sleeping in fragments no longer than a few minutes at a time. Dreams came anyway, sharp and cruel, faces twisted with ownership, hands reaching, whips cracking without end. She woke, shaking. As she rose again, she noticed something new in the air, a heaviness that was not weather. The forest felt watched, but not by men. This attention was older, quieter. Zora slowed. She came upon signs she recognized, stones stacked deliberately near a stream, feathers woven into thorn branches, ash patterns scattered like careless footprints, marks, protective ones, warnings. She was not alone. Zora followed the signs carefully, making herself visible the way she had been taught. No sudden movements, no false bravado. She reached a clearing just before dusk where the trees opened around a ring of fire-blackened stones. An old woman sat there. Her back was straight despite her age, her skin dark and lined like bark, her hair bound in strips of cloth, each one faded and frayed with time. She did not look up as Zora approached. "I wondered when you'd find me," the woman said. Zora stopped. "You knew I was coming?" The woman smiled faintly. "The land talks. You've been loud in it." Zora lowered herself slowly onto the ground, exhaustion heavy in her limbs. The child stirred but did not wake. "They hunt you still," the woman said. "Yes." "And you carry more than one life." "Yes." The woman nodded. "You've done well not to die." Zora almost laughed. The old woman reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Dried herbs, a small carved charm, a pouch of dark powder. "This will confuse their dogs," she said. "Not forever. Nothing lasts forever. But it will give you space." Zora's throat tightened. "Why help me?" The woman's gaze hardened. "Because I remember when I ran, and because survival is also a duty." She leaned closer. "There's a place north of here, people who won't sell you, won't ask where you came from, but you won't reach it unless you stop running like prey." Zora met her eyes. "What do I do?" "You become something harder to chase." That night, Zora scattered the powder in the wind, rubbed the herbs into her clothing, her skin, even the child's blanket. She broke branches deliberately where she did not go, left false trails near water, then vanished into dry ground. When the dogs returned, their baying turned confused almost immediately. Commands were shouted, gunshots cracked blindly. Zora climbed. The mountain rose steep and unforgiving. Her legs trembled, her breath burned. But the higher she went, the thinner the scent became, the more erratic the dogs sounded. At the crest, she paused only long enough to look back. Torches flickered below, scattered and uncertain. For the first time, she felt something new settle into her chest. Not hope, control. She descended the far side slowly, letting gravity work for her. The land here was harsher, quieter, less forgiving. She found a cave just large enough to shelter them and stayed there through the next day, conserving strength. The child cried in hunger, thin and desperate. Zora fed them with what little she had left, whispering promises she did not know how to keep. By nightfall, she moved again. She followed the stars when she could, trusting the old woman's directions. Days blurred together. Her body weakened, but her resolve hardened. When she finally saw signs of people again, real ones, not hunters, she nearly collapsed from relief. A small encampment hidden among rocks, shelters built into stone, fires carefully banked. This time she did not announce herself. She waited, watched, learned. When they found her, they did so gently. Water was offered without question, food without demand. "They'll keep coming," Zora said hoarsely. The man who led the camp nodded. "We know." For the first time since the chase began, Zora allowed herself to rest fully, not because she was safe, but because she was no longer alone. That night, as she lay beneath rough-stitched cloth and pine branches, listening to the steady breathing of others nearby, a realization settled into her bones. Running had carried her far, but it would not finish this. Some injustices did not fade with distance, they followed, and if she wanted the hunt to end forever, she would have to stop being its center. She would have to turn it outward. Morning arrived without ceremony. No birds announced it, no light rushed in to claim the dark. Dawn came quietly, as if the world itself had learned restraint. Zora woke in stages, awareness returning before comfort. First the weight of the child against her chest. Then the ache, deep, layered, unignorable. Her shoulder burned with a dull insistence. Her legs felt like borrowed things, slow to respond, stiff with exhaustion. She did not move at once. She listened. The encampment breathed around her. Soft footsteps, a low murmur of voices, the crackle of a fire being coaxed back to life. No panic, no urgency. That alone told her something important. She was still alive. The child stirred, eyes opening slowly, searching her face. Zora lowered her head until their foreheads touched. She did not speak. Words felt fragile. The child smiled faintly, reassured, and settled again. When Zora finally sat up, the man who led the camp was already watching her. He did not approach quickly. He did not speak first. He waited until she acknowledged him. "You ran far," he said at last. "Yes." "And you ran hard." "Yes." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "They will not stop easily." Zora did not answer immediately. She knew that truth already. She had known it since the night the rope was shown to her, like an explanation. "They don't need to," she said finally. "Not the way they think." The man studied her. "You're not leaving, are you?" "I am," Zora said, "but not to disappear." That day she rested. Not the shallow rest of hiding, but the deeper kind that allowed thought to stretch without panic, snapping it short. She ate slowly, drank clean water. Let others tend the fire while she watched and listened. The people there did not ask her name. She did not offer it. Names had weight. They were exchanged only when trust was earned. By evening, her body protested less loudly. Pain remained, but it had settled into something manageable, familiar. She had lived with worse. That night, she spoke with the old woman again. "You've reached the place most don't," the woman said. "The point where survival alone stops being enough." Zora nodded. "Running keeps you alive, but it keeps the world the same." The old woman smiled faintly. "Yes. I won't stay," Zora said, "and I won't hide anymore." The woman did not argue. She reached instead for another bundle, smaller than the first. Inside were dried roots, a strip of cloth, and a knife worn smooth by years of use. "You'll need this," she said. "Not to fight, to decide." Zora took it with both hands. The next night she left. Not alone. 2 others went with her at first, then 3 more joined along the way. People who had lost children, people who had run before and failed. People who understood that escape was not the same as freedom. Zora did not lead loudly. She taught. She showed them how to move without urgency, how to listen for the land's warnings, how to leave stories behind that confused rather than clarified. They moved south, not directly, never directly. They crossed paths the hunters expected fugitives to flee from, not toward. They laid trails that pulled attention miles away from the truth. They let rumor work for them, growing larger than reality ever could. The men who hunted began to fracture. Some gave up quietly, returning home with excuses they could live with. Others pressed on, driven less by purpose now than pride. Those were the ones Zora watched most closely. She never confronted them openly. She did not need to. A horse slipped and broke its leg where the ground looked firm. Supplies spoiled overnight. Dogs refused to follow commands, turning in tight circles, confused and afraid. Men argued, voices sharp, sleep scarce. Fear settled into their bones. They stopped speaking of capture. They spoke instead of ending something. One night, the man with the scar stood alone near a dying fire, staring into it as if answers might rise from the embers. Zora watched from the trees, unseen, unhurried. She did not hate him. That surprised her. What she felt was colder. Completion. When she finally stepped into the edge of the firelight, he froze. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not shout. He recognized her immediately. "You," he said. "Yes." His voice trembled despite himself. "I knew." Zora looked at him calmly. She did not raise her hands. She did not threaten. "You came back," he said. "No," she replied. "You followed." Silence stretched between them. "You've ruined everything," he said finally. "Men won't go where you've been. They won't take jobs they used to." Zora nodded once. "Good. You could have disappeared," he said. "Lived." "I did live," she answered. "Long enough to choose." He swallowed. "What do you want?" Zora thought of the nights running, the child's breath against her skin, the swamp's patience, the years of watching. "I want this to stop," she said. "Not just for me." He laughed once, brittle. "You think one woman—" Zora stepped closer, not threatening, certain. "You already know it's over," she said. "You just haven't accepted it." His shoulders slumped. Age showed itself fully then. Fear without disguise. "They won't listen," he said. "They don't need to," Zora replied. "They'll feel it." She turned away. He did not follow. He did not need to. Within weeks, the hunt collapsed entirely. Not with announcements or trials, just a gradual unraveling. Routes abandoned, jobs refused, stories retold until they warned instead of invited. Zora moved north again, this time openly. Not with banners or names, but with people, with systems, with quiet knowledge passed hand to hand. She helped others escape, taught them how to survive without becoming visible, how to endure without losing themselves. Her child grew into someone unafraid of silence. Years later, after laws shifted and wars rewrote borders, Zora stood at the edge of a small settlement that would never know her story. The child, no longer a child, stood beside her, eyes bright, unburdened. "Is it over?" the girl asked. Zora considered the question. "It changes," she said at last. "That's enough." They turned away together. The world continued. Not healed, but corrected. Do you believe justice must be loud to be real, or quiet to last? Was Zora right to return, or should survival have been enough? Share your thoughts below, and please subscribe.